Opposing Gloves here, and this is a book review video. Today we're covering Digital Audio Explained for the Audio Engineer by Nika Aldrich. Now, I just finished this book. It was given to me by an instructor because I was asking him questions about digital audio. Actually, I was not asking him questions about digital audio. I was asking him to borrow a book that I saw on the shelf about digital audio that was like an old book, like from 1990 something. And so he gave me this book instead as a recommendation. It's dated to 2004, so there have been, actually he guesses some of the upgrades that are going to happen, and he was totally right. Like that's he was right. So as far as the book is concerned, I think this book has information in it that, regardless of time at this point, is just going to be straight useful. You actually don't talk about audio for like the first 100, you don't talk about digital audio for like the first 100 pages. Instead, you talk about recording mediums, waveform, the physics of sound, and the anatomy of the ear, which I was really surprised about. Like, he went into great detail about like neurons and things, and I found that very useful. I've studied psychoacoustics lightly, and the information that I gained from this book just on that subject, I thought was like great. It made me really want to get a book on psychoacoustics. Now he avoids math as best as he can. Occasionally there are parts of math and it's just necessary to have. But as far as should you read this book or not, I would definitely put this on a book that, like, if you're going to be an engineer, an audio engineer, that you'll glean a lot from this book. I think most of it's very useful. There's a few parts where, because he's dancing around the math, I don't think he ever is inaccurate, but I think it could be explained better, but you kind of need the math side to do it. So I think he does a fabulous job. The charts are right where they're, like, if we see, we have a lot of figures and graphs and visual representation, and he's put them on the page that they're relevant to. So you're not like, oh, let me read what's on this page, but he's referencing a figure like 2 pages later. And it's not, it happens a few times, but it's usually on the same page. And so I really enjoy it. It makes the book a lot easier to read. As far as its density, it's pretty dense. There are chapters that are substantially more dense than other chapters, depending on what you're interested in. Things that were interesting that I took away from this book were the ear was a big one, the anatomy of the ear. Digital systems, I've already read about binary and its applications and how like multiplication and that kind of stuff works, but the floating point explanation, floating point math and decimals kind of blew me away on how that works. I was like, oh man. Like, it's just a lot more clear now what it does and why it does it. A few things that I didn't realize was that the upsampling and oversampling and dithering happen like all the time. And like, I don't know if you've ever heard of DSD. That was a new topic to me, but low bit converters were something that I also took away from this. So for example, you can record an entire track using just 1 bit. And if you record it right with an outrageous sampling rate, you can do it using something called delta modulation. And there's another thing called delta sigma modulation. And when you get multiple delta sigma modulators together to represent different amplitude ranges, you get an A to D converter that is exceptionally good and is from 2000s on. I believe that's what we still use, is these delta sigma converters. But it gets, the way he explains it, that was one of the subjects that ironically I thought was one of the coolest, but I also like struggled mega hard to understand it. I wound up looking up tons of other stuff, and I still don't consider my knowledge of it the greatest. I had another instructor recommend another book called Digital Audio Principles by Ken Pullman. It starts with a P. And it's actually in his bibliography in this book on advanced digital principles. So I think that's going to be the next book. So this isn't like the end-all book of digital audio, but he certainly uncovers a bunch. He talks about like IIR filters versus FIR filters, how filters work, what the design are. And it's done in a way that's like super simple. Like, I walked away from this going like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense the way it was done. He does talk about signal processing, dynamic processing, reverb, delay, which is reverb, the Fourier transform, and the Nyquist theorem, of course, all the stuff you would expect to be in here. I honestly think this is one of the best digital books I have read as far as its simplicity, readability, and amount of information that's useful. And at the end, he's actually got a whole bunch of things that are, myths of digital audio. What are those? And I was actually getting into it with another instructor that I had about 24-bit versus, because I made the statement that on the surface is pretty outrageous, but it's pretty much true. and that is you can accurately record, because he was talking about recording something and how he noticed a big difference from 16 to 24, and I was like, that's outrageous. You were hearing a difference for different reasons, not because the bit depth made the difference, because your A to D had problems. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you could do the same thing with a 10-bit signal, and if you had right A to D conversion, you would probably get the same result, given that they had a certain amplitude range. And he found that pretty amazing, and I ended up handing him the book and pointing to him the parts, because I just couldn't explain it well enough at the time. I still can't really explain it, but low bit converters blew me away. Like, that's pretty cool. Another thing that blew me away was in your DAW, there are stages where the oversampling reaches really high rates. Like, if you think about a compressor, it's got to have sample rates that are higher than your average rate, because what if you have a sample rate that doesn't go past your threshold, and you have a really fast attack time and a really slow attack time, but then other parts of the sample of the same frequency go past it, then some compressors will have issues with that. Other ones have been coded away, and he actually talks about it. So what you do is you'll just oversample your signal while it's going through a compressor. The sample rates necessary and the way they achieve them for low bit converters are pretty insane. Unary code was new to me. The idea that your master bus, so we need to bring bit rates down for the consumer audio level, but when it's going through in your DAW, you could have bit rates up to like 40 bit depth, as far as dithered down bit depth. And then if you go over to the shape dither and noise floors, those were all things that I was just like, oh my gosh, this is great. Because he showed that you could have a 16-bit depth signal with 150 dB of dynamic range in particular areas of the spectrum, just by using the Fletcher-Munson and other audio psychoacoustic things. And it made me really question why I use 24 versus 16. Besides, when you're doing audio, when you render it out, 16 isn't going to make that big of a difference. Now, when you're working with it, you get a ton more headroom with 24, and then 32 offers you all sorts of additional weird options that most people aren't even aware of, but they have the benefit of them. And those types of things. So that's why you'd work with it. But as far as a final medium, I used to look at 16-bit as sort of this, that's not 24, blah, 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 blah. But now I know all the reasons why I'd want what the difference is. And now I see no reason in a lot of cases, actually, why I'd want to go to do a 24, besides the fact that now it's the differences in processing power and things are negligible. Because when you're going through your system, back to the sentence I cut myself off on a while ago, keep shaking the table, the idea that during your processing, your bit depth goes up because you need more bits to accurately do the processing, especially when you get into oversampling and stuff. So you end up bringing up your processing, and your master fader could have a bit depth as high as 58 bits. At least he listed one DAW where that was the case, and the other faders, and it's all just because you need more decimal places as you're summing. And so as you're summing, you're going to need more values to more decimal places, I guess. In binary, they'd only represent 2 bits, but it's a doubling of your value. You're gonna need more of those when you're summing your signals, and then it'll dither it back down. And so live sound applications, like there's one, I believe it's I can't remember the name. They have a 40-bit audio system, but it's live, so their converters and everything are made for that. And so they can offer something like that because they don't have to guarantee consumer standard. It's just going to go to your system and then be output. And as long as you have all the correct stuff, you could technically have a much higher bit depth thing. Like, they exist. Do you really need that? No, you don't really need that, because the dynamic range of your ear, which is the whole reason why 16 bits is pretty okay. 24-bit technically covers the whole range, but it's not really necessary. And when you pump things up anyway using another system, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But anyways, this book is great. I thought it was awesome. I totally recommend it as a read. So that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, and have a blessed day.
Opposing blows. Reversing.